horrible thing Child Protective Services had to deal with.
I was a CPS worker for many years, but the worst case was the one I worked in 1999. We went to check on a potential abuse case. As we approached the house, the front door was slight open. As I knocked the door open more, I saw a completely naked man run down the hall and jump through a tiny window near the top of the wall. We called the police, and that's when I heard something. I walked toward the room the man came out of, and that's when I saw it. His daughter was tied to the bed, face down, completely naked with her legs tied between the two bedposts. I ran in to untie her. All she kept screaming was, "Daddy, no. Daddy, no." I can still hear her screams to this day.
How could you live after this?
We got a call about a potential child abuse case. We had already been out to the property once before, and we believed it was safe. As we walked up, we could hear screaming, and there was a loud gunshot. A woman saying, "He's dead, help us." The police came and opened the front door. There was a woman tied to a chair. She was the one that was yelling. Two of her children had been tied and hung from the railing. The one's child was hung by their neck with their hands tied behind his back. The other was hung by their feet. She was still alive. Her third child was tied to a smaller chair. She was also covered in blood and not moving. I couldn't imagine that she was still alive. Some of her clothes had been ripped, and she had a steak knife sticking out of her shoulder. The wife was screaming, "He killed my baby." He lay there with half of his head missing from a gunshot. It turns out this man hated his wife. He wasn't all there, and his last day on earth, he planned to torture and kill his children in front of her. He had it all journaled. He planned on torturing these 3 kids in front of his wife, killing them one by one, until he took his own life. It turns out if we didn't show up, the only one he planned on leaving alive was his wife. He had a detailed description of how he wanted his wife to live the rest of her life without any children, and the memories of her watching her children die.
Children tell all.
The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own, and was shadowing the after-hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state, and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids, and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered sex offender. A 12. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who was the bio parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to porn and sex by her bio dad. Anyway, one night, one of the kids said, "Girl's name touched my penis." The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually, where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS in their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed on the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently that state and judge did things differently. So, when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties, because she was a sex offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer, and her favorite thing to do was play box with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy, and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot, and I always wonder what happened to their family.
You can't unhear this one.
Late to contribute, but thought I would add. I am a neurosurgeon, not a CPS worker. The case was infantile rape. The true disgust, however, is when you consider the mechanics that result in the degree of injury. A child is flexible but weak. In the effort to rape her, both hips were grossly dislocated. A child's orifices are obviously too small for such penetration, so the vagina and anus were severely torn. The penis entered the rectum at least a few times, resulting in rectal tears and colonic perforation. The vagina and cervix were torn as well, and the uterus was severely damaged. The baby, to deal with crying, may have been hit against an object, resulting in multiple rib and spinal fractures, as well as a depressed skull fracture. I have been in neurosurgery for over 10 years now, and this was the only time I let out a tear and vomited violently. The infant did not survive. I did not have the heart to follow up on the perpetrator, for I feared my reaction if I were to learn he got away, or if I did not agree with the punishment.
Criminal investigator.
I'm not a CPS worker, but I worked criminal investigations for the Army for a number of years, and worked very closely with CPS on our child abuse neglect cases. One particular case sticks with me 5 years later. We received a call around 1700, which is usually a good indicator that we're going to be responding to alleged call. The bad ones always seem to come in right before we head home for the evening. The call came in from CPS. They had received a call from a soldier's unit. The soldier, husband, was in the field for training exercises, and had gotten a very vague emergency call from his wife that she was having some medical problems. Husband asked his unit to send somebody to go check on his wife to make sure she was okay. Too easy. Unit sends a guy over who finds the wife in the kitchen, covered in blood from the waist down, in her underwear. He also notices a blood trail from a back room into the kitchen foyer area. There is a bloody spatula on the counter. What's more is that there is animal feces and trash covering the entirety of the house, save for walking paths. There are 2 small children crying from somewhere in the back of the house. This dude immediately makes 2 calls, one back to his command and one to CPS. Command notifies husband, who is immediately sent home. Command also calls us. We receive this call after the one from CPS. CPS reports the same story. They also inform us that the CPS worker who responded to the house had to call for help because they threw up from the smell of the house before they even got inside. We respond. We observe exactly what was initially reported. The sight is unimaginable if you've never seen something like it. The smell was something between death and landfill. We wore Tyvek suits to move around the house. When we finally get the wife cleaned up, she tells us that while using the bathroom, she had a very early term miscarriage. She states that she had no idea what to do, so she grabbed a spatula from the kitchen and scooped the miscarriage into some diapers and towels. She then put everything into the freezer. Her intent was to keep them until her husband came home and then decide what to do. That shit craziness of this aside, CPS and law enforcement have now seen the conditions of this house.
Disgusting.
After hospital visits and making sure everyone is physically and mentally healthy, we hear back to the house with CPS to see what we're actually looking at. 2-story townhouse. The entire house was covered in trash, food, dishes, clothing, etc., and animal feces. The dining table was covered with dirty dishes and rotting food. The food in the fridge was expired and moldy. There was no sitting room on the couch in the living room. The master bedroom had a queen bed, no sheets. The mattress had a dark brown stain covering over half the mattress, was not positive for blood, never figured out what the hell it was. The kids only had mattresses on the floor. No other furniture in their rooms. Clothing, trash, and feces all over the floor. The bathrooms, I've seen truck stop restrooms that were cleaner. The list of disgusting things in this house goes on. CPS gave them 3 weeks to fix this atrocity, or the kids would be removed. In that time, both husband and wife get into more legal trouble. Not to detract from the story, but their charges included drugs and prostitution. CPS finally was able to get the kids out of that home. I never learned if the parents regained custody, but I pray they didn't. It was the absolute worst imaginable house I've ever seen. The smell stuck to your clothes. Housing said the only was the house would be safe to live in again, would be if it were completely torn down. Not to mention the batshit crazy parents.
Straight out of the movies.
I often tell this story and people think serial killer. However, this man only killed once. It was just so unbelievable, so gruesome. There were 2 other social workers that had been called to this property before. Both times they had seen the single father, who was never diagnosed with any mental condition, although if you met him, you would suspect something. Both times they decided it was okay and safe for his 7-year-old son to continue to live there. However, when I showed up, it was too late. Most of the time we go to an apartment or house, nothing really happens. A lot of people report cases because they see something and they think to themselves it's worse than it is. This time was horrifying. The boy was cut into about 20 different pieces. He had done this with near surgeon-type precision. The arms were both cut off the torso. The head was removed. The legs removed from the torso and then were perfectly cut at the knees and ankles. His body was spread out perfectly. Yet there was almost no blood on the ground. The man then used his son's blood to write a lot on the walls. Things like "You saw this coming. I needed help and no one helped. This could have been stopped if you tried." He even wrote a final letter explaining that he didn't want to leave a mess. Edit. Oh yeah, when we got there the man was gone. As far as I know, he was never found.
Quick and dirty.
Quick and dirty. This is this story. We show up and the parents weren't expecting us. You could tell they were in a panic. They began to tell us how their building had shut off the water, and they have been working with what they had. The smell in the apartment was terrible. As my partner went into the bathroom, he saw a 5-year-old boy washing himself in the bathtub. Problem was the water was almost brown, and their human feces floating in the tub. That was the quickest we took the children away.